and my name is Joan Gregory. I'm the co-coordinator of environmental ministry at First Unitarian Church and director of the sanctuary effort. And I have also served on the Social Justice Council for many years and helped to coordinate that effort.
So how did you meet Tim?
Well, actually, that's a bit of a matter of disagreement, I think, because my recollection and Tim's recollections are different here. I thought I had first met him when a mutual friend of ours, Alex Parvaz, brought him over to First Unitarian Church, and we were working in the garden. The environmental ministry / garden group was working in the garden. When you asked Tim that question, I have a feeling you're going to find out that he has a different recollection of that. And I'd be more likely to trust his recollection than mine because I'm a lot older than he is.
Okay. So from the garden, can you kind of describe those events leading up to his arrest? How much the church...
Oh my gosh, that's, so that's in my mind, that's a long and a short period of time. Let's see. Because I don't exactly know when that was, when Tim first came to First Unitarian Church, whether it was in the summer of 2008 or if it was the summer of 2007, I don't really know that or remember that. He will. That he did get either he got more involved in environmental ministry, or because he was already involved in environmental studies at the U then, and was already interested in the environment and climate, that he was already following a lot of these things, but he was going to rallies and events. Was he at the 2007 Step It Up 350.org? Actually, it was kind of right at that very formational time of 350.org. I know he was in the audience at a Stegner conference up at the U, and I knew him by that point in time, and that's when Bill McKibben spoke at the Stegner conference, and Tim asked a question of Bill at that conference. What am I to do as a young person? And Bill said, "Take to the streets." And so I think Tim saw that as as important, and was involved in actions before that and after that. It was later in that same conference that Terry Root made the comment when Tim asked her about everything she was saying that he didn't have a future, that climate change was going to be taking place in his lifetime, and if we didn't do something to change the trajectory, his life would be very much different from any of the lives that we had led, and that the climate was going to make it unlivable. It was going to be an unlivable climate, an unlivable future. And Tim left that session and went off in solitude for a period of time during that conference. And he describes that in Bitter 70 when there's the interview with Terry Root. So Tim was getting more and more involved, and I remember maybe it was like a sustainability gathering that we had of groups, people that were involved in sustainability in the valley, in Salt Lake Valley, and Tim just being totally fed up with what we were doing and not doing, sitting around talking and not necessarily getting anywhere, and leaving and saying to me something along the lines of, like, if anything comes of this, let me know and I'll come back, or I'll get involved. But and so I don't know that it was gradually, but in a very compressed timeline, he was getting to the point where it was just not enough to continue doing what we were doing, that people were not seeing what was going on, and he felt like something like an intervention was needed. And so, I mean, he was taking a course at the University of Utah. He had an exam. The exam actually was about the auction, the auction and the land that was being auctioned off at that time. And he left after finishing that exam and went down to the BLM office. And when he saw the picketing that was happening outside the office, he said, I can't do that anymore, and went inside. And when they asked him, are you a bidder? And he said, well, yes, I am. And, so are you here to bid? Are you a bidder? And so he went into the auction with the bidder paddle of 70 and learned as he was going along what one did with that paddle and how these auctions worked. And, clearly a time when there was less security for those auctions. Now they don't even conduct them in person anymore. They are conducted online, so that we can't be involved. And so that's kind of leading up to that day when he bid on the land.
So he was champing at the bit before the auction.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Wanting to do something that would wake people up. And he did.
Yeah.
He did. He didn't know what he was going to do when he walked in there that day. He just knew he couldn't picket anymore. He couldn't do that anymore. And it was actually, he has said that when he turned around and saw Krista Bowers crying in the auction at the pennies on the acre that this land was going for, that the leases, that kind of put him over. He had to do something, and he started bidding, and he started winning leases. And so he figured, well, I'm going to protect this land. I don't have the funds for it. I'm probably going to get in trouble for this. But that's okay, because that's going to make a statement. So
after that, what was his interaction with the Social Justice Committee here?
Well, it was with the environmental ministry, and it was with the church overall. I mean, Krista Bowers came back that day, and it was our solstice celebration day that evening. Mm-hmm. And she came into the solstice event and said, "Did you see the news? It was Tim. It was our Tim. Tim's the bidder. Did you see the news?" And then, and Tim contacted Michael Milkey immediately after that and said, "Michael, I need some help in raising some funds." And they actually did. He and Cliff raised funds for to help pay for those leases, and the BLM did not accept that money. And there was a precedent, as shown by Tim's attorneys later on that other organizations that bid on this land, the oil and gas companies that didn't always have the money in hand to give, and some never paid their for their leases. But Tim suffered the consequences that they would never suffer. So, and I think it was 9 times that Tim's trials and hearings and were delayed, and every time, I think they thought, the government thought, that it was weakening us, but it didn't. It gave us more strength and more courage, and it seemed that they would pick some interesting days like Guy Fawkes Day and whatnot to reschedule the events, the whatever hearing, trial, sentencing, all of those things, so that we got a lot of mileage out of that, and we got to tell the story many times over. And that was really, really important to us and to Tim. And we followed Tim's lead from that point because it was his story, and it was, it was important to for him to be in the lead. That he and everybody else, we all learned so much because we had not done this before. At all.
So Tim kind of personified the movement. Do you think it's necessary for a social movement to move forward and be successful to have a personification? People can
Yes.
judge.
Yes.
Here's his success. This is our success.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we tend to see things through people, and we relate to people. We relate better, a lot of us, to the struggles of people than to the struggle of the rocks and the mountains and the flowers and the trees, right? The oceans and the fish and the and nature. That so personification of the concept of the what is happening in the world. Is, I think, actually an essential piece of it. So
a lot of activity going on because of Tim. What led up to the events of your arrest? What happened there?
So my arrest, my first arrest, was in Washington, D.C. So we went to Washington, D.C. for Power Shift. It was a very impactful conference, basically, and there was an action associated with the conference, which was a march on the streets of D.C., ending at the Department of the Interior. My numbers may be off now, but it was something like 3,000 people marched in the streets of Washington, D.C., and when we got back to in front of the White House, 1,000 people broke off and headed towards the Department of the Interior. And the first march was a permitted march, so it was one that everybody would be comfortable and safe in participating. And then this other group of 1,000 broke off and headed to the Department of the Interior. And then out of that group, about 300, I swear, got into the lobby of the Department of the Interior, including a band. And we did a sit-in in the Department of the Interior, like I said, including a band. And and that we were bringing issues from across the country, from young people across the country, about the destruction of the land, about the destruction of the climate, and that it was time for action by the elders, by our government, by those in power to take action. And the power shift was the shift of power from those people to the young people, and on trying to make change. We sat on the floor in the Department of the Interior, and we sang. And I was the last to be arrested. They said the officer at that point, at the very end, said he was going to give me extra penalties for having to listen to my singing, because I sang alone. Blue Boat Home was what I sang in the Department of the Interior, and it was great because that, the interior of those spaces is lots of great acoustics anyway. I remember an officer, who teared up, and she was an African American officer, and told us that she was remembering when there were different marches.
Yeah. That was the first arrest.
Yes.
What was the second one?
So the second one had to be was on the street, Main Street, right after Tim's sentencing, blocking Main Street. And the third was lying down, blocking the parking garage of the federal building here in Salt Lake City, in protest of the actions of our senators and representatives.
Okay. So there was a lot more at stake for Tim than there was for you.
For sure.
Did you ever feel at some time, Tim, maybe you've gone too far? Was there ever that feeling?
Well, Tim helped me leave my comfort zone far, I don't know, way out there. I lost track of my comfort zone and learned that the place to be was the most important place to be was out of comfort as a white privileged person, and as a person who had benefited from the fossil fuel based life that we were living in, and as a person who was part of the problem, and I needed to be part of the solution. So ask the rest of the question again. Sorry.
Well, I was asking if maybe
did I think Tim had gone too far, was pushing us too far? And I would say, yes, I was always feeling like we were pushing too far, and also knowing at the same time it was that cognitive dissonance for me all the time. Ouch, oh gosh. Are we really, oh yeah, that's the only way that we're going to do this, is we have to keep pushing the envelope, and making it so that people can see. I would often say that I felt like Tim opened a crack in the universe so that we could see what was really going on.
So there was no fear, no real fear. It was more of a sense of fulfillment, I take it.
Was I scared? Like, yeah, I was. Was I worried? Yeah, I was, especially when I started to, I was leading the effort here, and I'm leading other people, into this. I remember when we crossed the tracks to go and stand in front of the federal building on the sidewalk and the land that the federal building is on, and we were told we couldn't do that, and that would be against the rules when Tim was being tried, and people filled out their forms, and we had hundreds of people who crossed the tracks line, had filled out a form that said, if I'm arrested, here's where my medicine is, here's how you get in touch with my family members, and risking arrest, that had never done that before, because they believed in what we were doing, what Tim had done was the right thing to do.
So off to prison went Tim. What were kind of the relationships while Tim was in prison? How much did we interact with Tim?
I guess I got to say one thing is that I don't think we really expected Tim to be dragged off to prison that very day. And that was one of the hardest days in the whole time. Tim got moved around to a number of different prisons, and some close enough to go and visit, and others way too far away. They, on purpose, put him in places that were far from where his family was, where we were, to visit him. I did have opportunities to speak with him on the phone on occasions, but there wasn't lots of that. But what we did here at First Unitarian was try to make it possible for people to write to him. We got his information, how to get in touch with him. We communicated with him on a regular basis via mail, and sent what he needed, what we were allowed to send in packages. I think we were sending books. We were ordering books and sending them to him so that he would have some things to read. So tried to keep him well supplied, especially as a librarian, which is what I am. Wanted to make sure he had the reading materials that he needed. He seemed to appreciate that, and the phone calls. I know I appreciated the phone calls when I would hear from him, and I would check in with his family. And others, I'm sure, were checking in with his family as well to see how they were doing. Krista and I went to visit him when he was in the prison in outside of Reno, but we never got to see him because that was the weekend that they put him in solitary confinement, or it may not have been totally solitary, but it was with someone that you'd rather actually be in solitary. We went to visit him thinking that we were going to see him, and that was quite a shocker. And spent a lot of time on the phone, back and forth on the phone with Pat Shea, and during that visit where we were there not seeing him. But we also got a lot of care and love and help from the Unitarian congregation there in Reno. So I'd definitely say that Tim's actions influenced me and changed my life.